Please be seated. Well, good morning. Here we are. We're still in Christmas, just as we've been told this morning. Although I think it's all right to have your Christmas tree kind of on its way out at this point. So I'm told, not that I'm an expert on these things. I do remember 2 years ago here in this place, I think it was a little bit fuller of people then. I had to get a seat at the back. It was the first time I'd come to St. James, and Harriet was preaching. And I remember thinking, oh, this is a place I could come. I'd been recommended by somebody in Edinburgh to try it out. And that was 2 years ago now. Obviously, I haven't been every week since then for obvious reasons. But it's great at least that we can worship together in different forms, in different ways. And I know that sometimes the repeated sense of COVID being in the air and being something, there's restrictions and anxieties, take the shine a little bit off our celebrations and just our sense of purpose in our daily lives. But nevertheless, we've got so much to be thankful for. And I think we should see Epiphany as a little bit like a booster from Christmas. It kind of takes Christmas and it kind of gives us another kind of push into the new year, into the weeks and months ahead. I have another good memory of Epiphany from about 15 years ago, thereabouts, when I was having a holiday at this time of the year, funnily enough, in Galway, in Ireland. And, well, 15 years ago anyway, they made quite a lot of Epiphany. There was kind of churches advertising Epiphany services, which was a bit unfamiliar to me in the way they did that. But it was done in a kind of quiet way. And I can recall in my mind, still have this picture of the soft light and the soft stone of the church, a very kind of inviting kind of feeling. And a way of saying that Epiphany means that, as I think as we heard this already this morning, it's the manifestation of what it means for Jesus to have come to earth on that first Christmas. It's the setting forth, it's the explaining of what that is all about, even to people who haven't the first clue, who haven't been to Sunday school, who come from another side of the world, who've not heard the gospel before, who don't know the Christian religion, whose heads, these are talking about the wise men here, whose heads are full of wise stuff, their own theories, their own ideas, their own imaginations. Even to them, God can speak. The message can get through. And I think that's what we hear with the three wise men. We think there's three of them. It may not have been three. There were three gifts. It doesn't mean there were three wise men. But let's just say there were three wise men. That those three were able to be spoken to. That they knew that God revealed to them somehow the significance of this child in the manger wasn't just an ordinary child. Yes, he was an ordinary child in some ways, but he wasn't just an ordinary child. He was, as they understood it, the King of the Jews, but the King of the Jews was special. You think, well, there are so many kings in the world. Why would the King of the Jews be special to people from much further away in the east with much bigger kingdoms and much better palaces and much more, all the riches that they had to bring with them? Why were they bowing to this King of the Jews? Unless they'd had it revealed to them that this King of the Jews was the universal, the worldwide Emperor, King of all creation, King of all the world, of all the universe. This seems to have been revealed to them, almost despite all their learning and all their ideas and all their background and culture. God was able to bring these learned people, we're not sure they were kings, but they were certainly people from a court, people with great majesty, that God was able to get through to them, and they fell on their knees. They fell down, not maybe on their knees, maybe actually on their tummies. They fell down with such, not just appreciation, but adoration of this baby. Maybe not a brand new baby, because we do know that it took them a while to get to Bethlehem. And the fact that immediately afterwards Herod says, I want my soldiers to go out and kill all those babies, all those kids that are under, male children that are under 2 years old, suggests that it's anywhere between the actual birth of Jesus and his being 2 years old. So Jesus might have already been a toddler by this point when the wise men came to see him. But nevertheless, he's still this weak, seemingly insignificant child, who's probably at this point not, as Luke has it, in the manger or in some sort of room where they kept the animals. That was the kind of emergency place they had to use for him to be born. But at this point, I think they've managed to work out some accommodation. So Matthew just speaks about the house. They've rented a house for the first few months of Jesus' birth, anyway, of his life, and that's when these men come to pay homage. Now, Jesus is someone who, as I say, seems insignificant, and yet the wise men make a special purpose out of finding him. And they, in some sense, led to that, maybe by something that God says to them, because remember that they're spoken to in dreams at the end of the passage. So we expect that maybe at the start of the story they were spoken to in a dream, although it doesn't say that. What we do know from the text is that there was a star guiding them. Now this star that rose, and they saw it rising, and as it moved, they moved. It was a bit like having your very own sat-nav in the heavens, that they followed it. What I find interesting is, what would they have been thinking at that time as they saw the star and followed the star? They would be thinking things like, as many people believed in those days, that a very important emperor or king was being advertised by something strange going on in the heavens, some movement of a star in the heavens. We believe that there's a story about Nero, the Roman emperor, about 50 years later, who he was a little bit put out when people started telling him that a star was moving about in the heavens, announcing a new king, a new emperor. And Nero was thinking, well, I'm still here, what does this mean for me? And Herod must have felt something similar when he heard about this star moving about that these men had been following. That suggested that his days were numbered and that there was a new king. And of course, interestingly, we do believe that Herod dies about a year later after this, or maybe a few weeks after trying to send his soldiers to get hold of this baby, or this toddler. He himself dies. So his days were numbered in the same way as Nero's days were numbered. There's a new king on the way. This is quite a common thing in the ancient world, to believe that something going on in the heavens has significance for a new, special ruler coming along. But more than that, the star doesn't just appear in the heavens or move around, it actually guides them to Bethlehem eventually. Of course, they seem to lose their nerve at one point because they get to Jerusalem, and then does the star somehow disappear? They go to Jerusalem and think, well, let's find out some more information. That's the big town. And it's only afterwards that they go with the star. Now, Herod is wily enough to know that if he just sends his troops to Bethlehem, that's not going to work, because the star's not going to appear to them. It seems to be these wise men who see the star. So he says, you go on to Bethlehem and find out the exact place where he is, and then send for me, and I'll come and say hello to him and pay homage to him too. Now, the star also has significance in the Old Testament. And briefly, just to say that in the book of Numbers, there was this verse that says, where Balaam is prophesying, the guy with the donkey, remember? And he prophesies and says, a star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel. A man will arise from Israel. Rather mysterious prophecy that he makes. And in the times just before Jesus, when we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, it seems obvious that this prophecy was pretty popular, that there was a belief in the Dead Sea Scrolls community, these people who lived in the caves in Qumran in the desert, that there was going to be a Jewish Messiah who was going to come, who was going to be the new David, the son of David. It's not completely clear just who this Messiah is going to be. But the star does seem to have a role to play, to the extent that the star is referred to in these Dead Sea Scroll texts. But also, when the Jews rose up against the Romans for the final time, for the second and final time, in 130 to 135 AD, so a good 100 years after the time of Jesus, The man who led them was called Simon, son of the star, Bar Kokhba. And he's not saying he was the star. He was saying that he was the son of the star. He was born under a star. A star was leading him. This prophecy was this prophecy that spoke, he thought, of himself. Now, he was a great failure in the end. I mean, he did a lot of, he won a few battles, but he eventually lost. Jesus is understood to be linked with this prophecy. I think Matthew wants us to know that, not perhaps in a very obvious way, but this star is a sign in the Old Testament that when you see a star in the heavens, it has something to do with the Messiah. And that's who Jesus is. He isn't just a boy. He isn't even just King of the Jews. He is the Messiah who was going to come and establish God's reign on the whole of the earth. Herod was frightened, therefore, for good reasons. And he heard, he possibly knew this already, but he was certainly had his knowledge reinforced by the high priests and the scribes and the scholars who told him it's Bethlehem where this boy, this Messiah, is to be born. I wonder if Herod thought, when he asked the wise men, exactly when did you see the star appearing, that he wanted to then get, with this information, get his own scholars maybe to say, oh, that was just a comet. Don't worry, it was just, yeah, we know that one. We explained that was Halley's comet or something like that, and we were able to kind of just put that out of the way, explain it. It's not so much a threat, but it was a threat, and Herod knew that, and that was why he had to take action by sending out the command to murder all the young boys under 2 years old. But let's, as we come to just to conclude thinking about this wonderful passage, just think a little bit more about the way in which the wise men rejoiced at this, when they rejoiced in front of Jesus, when they actually saw him with their own eyes. They had come and they submitted all their wisdom. They submitted this great learning, this great culture, all these riches, and submitted it and put it in service of a higher wisdom, the higher wisdom of the one true God. And when they saw Jesus as the embodiment of that wisdom, in his very humble form, it says in the Greek that they rejoiced, joy great, hugely. I mean, it's just sort of 4 words of saying the same thing. It's like a football goal celebration. It's just kind of joy without any kind of sense of restraint. They found what they were looking for. They gave their gifts in a way that Psalm 72 had prophesied back in the day when it was written about King Solomon. May the kings of Tarshish and of distant shores bring Solomon tribute. May the kings of Sheba and Seba present him gifts. May all kings bow down to him and all nations serve him. Now, whether these people were kings or not, there is certainly a close parallel in the idea of tribute being brought to Solomon in the Old Testament and tribute being given to Jesus in the New Testament. Now, we know that Christmas is over too quickly. We realised that we had something that gave us a focus for a couple of weeks, maybe more than a couple of weeks, and then suddenly it's gone. It's almost as if the bridegroom has come and thrown a party, and then suddenly he's disappeared. Now, this sort of slight sense of kind of loss and slight sense of emptiness that some of us might feel. I think we're all different with this, I suppose, but we might feel a little bit, like, particularly with the restrictions that we're having after Boxing Day, that Christmas wasn't long enough. It's gone away too quickly. And it hasn't been as restful as we'd hoped. And I think Paul is good with this because he picks this up in Ephesians. Because I think what he's saying is that Christmas isn't just for Christmas. It's not just for, it's a gift you unpack, and then if you unpack a gift and then just put it in your cupboard, then you haven't really liked the gift very much. I know that happens. But it's a gift that you unpack and then you put it in the center of your room. It's something that is going to really serve you during the weeks and months and throughout the year and beyond. So Christmas is there to be unpacked, and that's what Epiphany is about. It's the unpacking of the Christmas gift. It's the putting the spiritual light box in the middle of the room. Now, I don't actually particularly like boxes. I like light boxes. They're a bit of a distraction, but I did try one once a few years ago when I was living in Fife, and people said, you really need it to live up here to have one of those to get you through the winter. But anyway, some people find them helpful. But spiritually speaking, it's a bit like Epiphany is the showing forth. It's the light that radiates out of the Christmas event, the Christmas message. And what is that message? Well, Paul tells us in Ephesians that God had a plan. I think Paul spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even just last week, about this big picture, this big plan that he had from eternity through to the time of Christmas and beyond. How not just the Jews, but also the Gentiles were going to be brought into a religion, a new way of having faith, and access to God, a kind of coming into the presence of God and a living with God and God living with us that was available not just to Jews, but to Gentiles too, because it's to be a spiritual faith. And the gospel gives us assurance, the assurance that faith based on God's mercy and based on the gift of the Spirit allows us to have confidence to come into his presence, to have assurance in Jesus Christ as God's great yes and amen to us. But the other thing I always want to emphasize as we're looking at this passage briefly in Ephesians is that in the reading from Ephesians, there's a bit where it says, the wisdom of God in its rich variety. This is like 4 lines from the bottom of the reading. So that through the church, the wisdom of God in its rich variety might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. The wisdom of God through the church in its rich variety might be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. Quite a difficult verse. A lot there to unpack. I don't want to take long, but just to say a couple of things. This wisdom of God in its rich variety, the Greek word, remember Joseph had a multicolored coat that he got and got into trouble for showing it off with to his brothers. He had this coat of many colors. Well, the word in the New Testament passage in Ephesians is multicolored. It's polypoikolos. Joseph had a poikolos, multicolored coat. This is a many multicolored coat. Okay, so it's not coat. Sorry, it's not a coat. It's a wisdom. Okay, but it's many multicolored in its varieties, in its forms, in its shapes, in its appearance. So there's something rather splendid about it, but there's also something which fits every nation and culture and time and person and personality type. There's a great diversity in God's wisdom. So there is that. It's manifold in that sense. God expresses his gospel, his good news in different forms to suit us, each of us. But the other thing I think it says that I think is important in this verse is that this all happens, this wisdom of God is revealed through the church. I guess it's revealed to the church first in order for it then to be revealed through. But the point that Paul is making is it's revealed through the church. So where do you actually see this wisdom in all its colours and in all its shades and shapes? Well, you see it in the church. In other words, the church has become part of the gospel. The church has taken Christmas and made it its own and put it in its front room and made it the source of its life and its being. The church lives out the gospel and is shaped and illuminated and enlightened and given colour and given beauty by the gospel so that other people can see it. Now, other people might be people from a distance, people who don't yet know of Christ and the good news that is in Jesus Christ, that we have access to God in the Spirit. But God seems to say, or Paul seems to be saying here, that God is making this wisdom, that this is possible to live with God forever, known to the powers in the heavens. Well, it says to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. I'm not quite sure who those are exactly, what those rulers and authorities might be. But whoever they are, the church is instructed to lead the way in demonstrating and manifesting and being in some way its own epiphany, or being an epiphany of the Lord himself. So I just want to conclude by saying, if the church is going to lead the way this year towards the restoration of all things that Ephesians talks about in chapter 1 and then in chapter 4 as well, but in chapter 3 it's saying this wisdom is available for this to happen. Here is an upbeat vision that Paul is giving to inspire the church to lead the way. Now, lead the way doesn't mean going about sort of bossing people and giving opinions and going on social media and saying, well, it's obvious, isn't it, that? Or, these guys are wrong, we're right, kind of thing. It's leading the way in such a way that is done in terms of life and in terms of wise words for a situation. Not in huge theories, not in big opinions, not even about being positive when things are dark. We just need to give leadership by being positive, and just even if things are bad, well, no, they're not really bad at all, everything's fine. I don't think that's really what the gospel is about. The gospel is prepared to say that in the darkest times of January at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, whatever it is, in the afternoon, things are dark. Life can be dark. Life can be about loss, disease, anxiety, bereavement. The gospel is not about saying, no, these things don't exist, or even saying, let's just shut up about them. In fact, the gospel tells us to speak about these things. The gospel speaks about the weakness of Jesus. The gospel speaks about the fact that young boys were killed at that time by a terrible ruler, Herod. It doesn't soft soap those things. What the church is called to do is to rest in its true identity. That is to rest on Christmas, to find ourselves in Christmas, in who Jesus is for us, a beginning for the new year that will lift us up if we allow him to lift us up. Amen.